I've lived in the same house on the edge of Taos, New Mexico, for nearly 25 years now. Adobe walls, creaking floors, and a backyard that opens into the desert, the kind of place where silence can stretch so long it starts to hum. I used to love that quiet. These days, it feels more like punishment. My name is James Harland, and I thought I'd learn to live with loss. Thought I could fold it neatly into my life like an old photograph, one you don't throw away but don't dare look at too long either. I was wrong. That night, the night it all began, rain came down like shattered glass. Thunder rolled across the Sangre de Cristo mountains, and the power flickered every few minutes. I'd been sitting by the window, drinking black coffee, staring at the same ridge I've stared at for years. The ridge where my son, Ethan, disappeared 18 years ago. The sheriff called it a flash flood accident. One minute his research group was mapping fault lines, the next gone, washed into a ravine. They found the Jeep crushed, the tents shredded, and 2 of the students, but not Ethan. They told me the current might have carried him miles away. I spent months searching before the state ordered me to stop. Every year, I still drive out to that ridge on his birthday. I bring his favorite compass, the one I gave him when he was 12, and I talk to him. You'd think after nearly 2 decades, I'd stop waiting for an answer. But grief has a strange echo. It was exactly 2:19 a.m. when the phone rang. That old rotary phone hadn't rung in years. My cell phone was dead on the counter, but this sound, it came from the wall phone I kept only because I couldn't bring myself to disconnect it. The first ring startled me. The second one froze me. By the third, I felt something crawl up my spine. When I looked at the caller ID, my stomach dropped. Ethan Harland. The same number he'd had when he left for that trip. The same one I'd seen carved into the coroner's report device recovered. Water damaged. Irreparable. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. My hand hovered over the receiver. Every rational part of me screamed impossible. But my heart, that stubborn, foolish part that never gave up, whispered answer it. So I did. Hello? My voice cracked. Static. A faint hum. Then, breathing. Slow, uneven, human. Who is this? I asked. Who's there? The static deepened, like wind rushing through a tunnel. Then a voice, soft, trembling, whispered, Dad, can you hear me? I froze. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. I couldn't breathe. That voice, I knew it. Every syllable, every rhythm. It wasn't just similar. It was Ethan. Ethan? I whispered, my throat tightening. Ethan, where are you? No answer. Just more static, a faint cough, and what sounded like the echo of rain, not outside, but inside the line. Then the connection dropped. I stood there for a long time, listening to the dial tone hum against my ear, until it turned to silence. The house felt different after that. The rain stopped, but the air grew heavier, like the walls themselves were listening. I checked the phone log. The call had lasted 41 seconds. The number was real. At 3 a.m., I played the voicemail recording from my landline's old answering machine. My hands shook as I pressed play. There it was again, the same voice. Softer this time, buried under static. Dad, I'm sorry. They didn't tell you. Then silence. I sat in the dark until dawn, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring again. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a glitch, some cross-line interference. Another part, the part that still sets an extra place at the table every Christmas, knew better. Because that voice wasn't a memory. It wasn't a dream. It was him. And that night, as the desert wind howled outside my window, I realized something terrifying. 18 years after my son's death, Ethan had just called me from the other side of silence. When people talk about loss, they always say time heals. I used to believe that too. But time doesn't heal. It just buries the pain under layers of habit, the morning coffee, the mail you forget to open, the polite nods to neighbors who don't ask about the picture on your mantle. 18 years had passed since the desert took my son, Ethan Harland. But I still woke up every morning expecting to hear his shoes scrape against the tile, his voice calling, Dad, where's the good cereal? That sound never came back. Only silence. After the accident, the world kept moving, but I didn't. My wife Marianne couldn't stand being in that house anymore. Every corner reminded her of Ethan, the piano he tried to learn, the sneakers by the door, the smell of his cologne that somehow lingered for months after he was gone. She left 2 winters later and never came back. I don't blame her. Grief can make strangers of people who once loved each other. I stayed. Not because I was strong, but because leaving felt like admitting Ethan was really gone. I turned his old room into a small museum. Maps pinned to the wall. Notebooks filled with scribbles and equations. His college jacket hanging by the window. Every Sunday, I dusted it all. Like a ritual. Like maybe, one day, he'd need it again. The night after the call, I couldn't sleep. I replayed that message over and over. Dad, I'm sorry. They didn't tell you. I'd memorized every breath, every crackle of static. When the sun rose, I went to Ethan's room and sat on the edge of his bed. His compass, the one I'd given him when he was 12, still sat on the nightstand. I opened it, the needle trembled slightly before settling on north. For some reason that movement made my throat close up. I remembered the last time we'd spoken the morning before his final research trip. He'd been standing in this very doorway, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, smiling like he'd already conquered the world. Dad, he'd said, if this project works, it could change everything. I'd frowned. You're a geologist, not a superhero. He'd laughed. You'll see. One day, people will thank us for what we find. Those were the last words he said to me. Hours later, the storm hit. The official report was blunt. Flash flood. 3 casualties. 1 missing, presumed dead. The sheriff found the jeep crushed against a canyon wall. They said Ethan's body was likely swept away. Impossible to recover. But there was one detail that never left me. The phone. The report mentioned partial recovery of a damaged communication device belonging to the deceased. They gave it back in a plastic evidence bag, shattered screen, casing warped. I buried it with Ethan's other belongings. That phone had no power left in it. None. So how, after 18 years, had it called me? I checked my landline history again. The number matched exactly. I even traced it through the local directory. It shouldn't exist. No active account, no forwarding. Just gone. By evening, my nerves were shot. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window. The desert outside was painted gold by the setting sun, vast and empty. Somewhere out there, my son's voice had traveled through the static to reach me. At 9 p.m., I played the voicemail one last time. But this time, it was different. The message had changed. It still began the same Ethan's voice, distant, frightened. Dad, I'm sorry. But then came something new. A whisper, almost inaudible beneath the static. They didn't tell you the truth. I froze. My hands shook as I replayed it again, pressing the speaker against my ear. They didn't tell you the truth. I turned the volume up to maximum. The words were there, faint, yes, but real. Not imagination, not interference. The call wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It was a message. And suddenly, the grief that had anchored me for 18 years began to shift. Not disappear, but move. Like something heavy being lifted just enough for me to breathe again. Because for the first time since the day he died, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in nearly 2 decades. Hope. I didn't know what the truth was. But if Ethan was trying to tell me something, then I'd find out. Whatever it took. The next morning, I drove into town with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The sun had barely risen over the Sangre de Cristo range, and a low mist rolled through the highway like a restless ghost. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, the words looping in my head. They didn't tell you the truth. At the local electronics shop in Taos, the owner, a wiry man named Cliff, looked half amused when I placed my landline receiver on the counter. I need you to check something, I told him. A call came through last night from a disconnected number. I want to know how that's possible. He smirked. You sure it wasn't a scam call? We get weird reroutes from old databases all the time. Not from this number, I said quietly. It's been dead for 18 years. Cliff's expression shifted from smug to cautious. He hooked the phone to a diagnostic device, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. A few minutes passed in silence before he frowned. That's odd, he muttered. This call didn't go through any known carrier. No timestamp trail, no routing ID. It's like it was injected directly into the line. Injected? Yeah, like an analog burst. A radio signal forced into the line frequency, rare as hell these days. You'd need specialized equipment, military or geological. I stared at him. Geological? He shrugged. Maybe some underground seismic relay. But why the hell would that call a landline? I left the store with more questions than answers. The moment I stepped outside, a gust of wind tore across the parking lot, carrying dust and the faint scent of rain. It sounded like static. For a second, I swore I heard Ethan's voice again. Dad, can you hear me? By the time I got home, I'd already decided what to do next. Ethan's old college notebooks still sat in his room. Most of them were full of sketches, maps, strata layers, fault line notes. But one binder caught my attention. On the cover, he'd written, Solgen Minerals, Field Phase Project 04. I'd never seen that name before. I flipped through the pages. Detailed coordinates, soil samples, test readings, and one line scribbled near the bottom in red ink. Signal patterns inconsistent. Possible interference from magnetic resonance. Ask Pierce. Pierce. That had to be Professor Alan Pierce, Ethan's mentor at the University of New Mexico. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. I called the university. They transferred me to his office. When I mentioned my name, the line went silent. James. His voice was slow, careful. I didn't expect to ever hear from you again. Neither did I said. But I need to ask you about Solgen Minerals. Ethan worked with them, didn't he? He sighed deeply. That's complicated. Solgen was a private contractor funding geological fieldwork under the guise of renewable resource mapping. Ethan's group was tasked with studying subthermal cavities in the basin. The basin? You mean near Llano Estacado? Yes, but listen to me carefully. His tone hardened. That project was shut down after the accident. Everything was confiscated, data, samples, even the field journals. Solgen vanished overnight. No one talks about it anymore. Why? I demanded. Because it wasn't just a flood, James. The reports were altered. There were inconsistencies. But whatever was buried out there, someone wanted it to stay buried. His words hit like a thunderclap. My pulse pounded in my ears. Are you saying Ethan's death wasn't an accident? Pierce hesitated. I'm saying let it go. Please. That desert doesn't give back what it takes. The call ended abruptly. That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the wall phone. The rain had returned, steady and rhythmic. Around midnight, the line crackled again. The same static hissed through the receiver before I even touched it. Then, faintly, through the interference, came a voice. Ethan's voice. Dad, I'm still here. My chest tightened. Ethan, where are you? Tell me. The response came broken, strained, like it was traveling across miles of dust and time. Find me, where the light never reaches. Then, silence. I stood there, heart racing, staring at the phone as the storm outside roared louder. On the table lay Ethan's field notebook, open to a page filled with jagged red lines and notes. I noticed something I'd missed before, a pattern drawn in the corner. It looked like an audio frequency graph. The same pattern I'd heard behind his voice. It wasn't random static. It was a coded signal. Ethan wasn't just calling me. He was sending coordinates. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I felt that old pull again. The one that used to drive him into the desert with a compass and a dream. Except this time, I wasn't letting him go alone. The following morning, the desert sky was the color of old copper pale gold near the horizon. bruised purple above. I packed a duffel bag, grabbed my late wife's compass, and printed the map from Ethan's old binder. The coordinates hidden in the signal led toward Llano Estacado Basin, a desolate stretch of land 3 hours southeast of Taos. No towns, no radio towers, nothing but sand, canyons, and silence. I told myself I was just going to look, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about proof anymore. It was about faith, the kind that keeps you alive long after reason says you shouldn't be. The road narrowed to cracked asphalt, then to dirt. The farther I drove, the emptier the world became. Sagebrush shimmered in the heat, and vultures circled in the distance. The desert had its own heartbeat. You could almost feel it under your skin. When I reached the basin, the wind died completely. The GPS lost signal. My phone flickered and went black. For a long time, I just stood outside the truck, staring across the endless valley. It was a graveyard of forgotten machinery, rusted scaffolds, collapsed tents, and fragments of solar panels half buried in sand. Ethan's team had camped here 18 years ago. I found a torn tarp tangled around a broken pole. A faded logo was still visible beneath the dust. Solgen Minerals, Project Phase 04. My stomach twisted. Near the edge of a dried ravine, I spotted something else. A burn mark, etched deep into the rock. Circular, too clean to be natural. The stone around it had melted, fused into a glossy sheen. Lightning couldn't have done that. The air shimmered faintly above the crater. I crouched and picked up a shard of glass, fused with sand. When I held it to the light, it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. A voice startled me. "You shouldn't be here, old man." I turned sharply. A woman stood 10 feet away, wearing a ranger jacket and mirrored sunglasses. She looked to be in her 40s, sunburned and steady. "I'm looking for my son," I said. "He worked this site years ago. Ethan Harland." Her expression changed. "You're his father. You knew him?" "I was stationed here during the cleanup after the storm," she said quietly. "Name's Nora Velasquez. We were told to seal the area. Nothing more. But some of us, we saw things." "What kind of things?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "After the flood, the company brought in heavy trucks at night. They told us it was debris removal, but they didn't take anything out. They buried it." "Buried what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the far ridge. "If you go down there, you'll find an old maintenance tunnel. That's where the signals used to come from. People around here call it El Pasillo de los Muertos, the Hall of the Dead." I asked if she'd ever gone inside. "Once," she said. The air made my radio scream with static, like voices trying to talk over each other. I never went back. Before I could say more, she walked away, disappearing into the heat haze like she'd never been there. I followed her directions, trekking half a mile through sand and stone, until I reached a ridge split open by erosion. The tunnel mouth waited below a jagged wound in the earth. I shined my flashlight inside. The air was cooler, heavy with dust. Rusted metal rails ran along the floor, and faded hazard signs hung crooked on the walls. I took a few cautious steps forward. The static started almost immediately. It came from my pocket, my phone, which I was sure had died hours ago, flickered back to life. The screen glowed white, and then Ethan's voice bled through the speaker. "Dad, you're close." I froze. "Ethan?" The voice was faint, warped by interference. "They buried us where the light can't reach. Find the truth." The call cut out. The phone went black again. I stood in the darkness, trembling. My flashlight beam landed on something half buried in the dust. A metal tag with an engraving. E. Harland, Survey Unit 3. My throat closed. It was his. Outside, thunder cracked in the distance. Storm clouds rolled in fast over the basin, turning the desert sky the color of blood. I knew what I had to do. Whatever Solgen had hidden here, whatever truth Ethan had died trying to expose it, was still down there. And I wasn't leaving without finding it. By the time the first raindrops hit the sand, I was already standing at the mouth of the tunnel. The light from the storm flickered across the rocks, turning everything into flashes of gold and black. I hesitated for only a second. Then I stepped inside. The deeper I went, the colder it got. My flashlight caught glimpses of rusted pipes and torn cables that ran like veins through the walls. The tunnel sloped downward in a spiral, carved by machines decades old. A faint hum came from below, the same tone I'd heard behind Ethan's voice. About 50 yards in, the passage opened into a large underground chamber. The walls were lined with old computer terminals, their monitors shattered. In the center stood a cluster of cylindrical tanks, half buried in sand, each marked with the same faded logo. Solgan Minerals, Phase 7, Thermal Core Experiment. The air smelled faintly metallic, and underneath that, something else. Burned plastic. I moved closer. A workstation lay overturned beside the tanks. Papers were scattered everywhere, brittle from age. I picked one up, brushing off the dust. It was a field report, handwritten, core readings unstable, temperature rising beyond containment threshold, evacuation pending. The next line made my pulse stop. Supervisor E. Harland. I read it again. Ethan's name, clear as day. I kept digging through the papers. Each page was worse than the last mentions of magnetic resonance failures, containment breach risk, core ignition sequence errors. It wasn't a simple research project. It was an energy experiment gone wrong. Something had exploded down here. As I turned toward one of the control panels, my flashlight beam caught something half buried near the base of a console. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. It was a helmet cracked, dented, and caked with dried mud. On the side, faded but unmistakable, was the name E. Harland. My throat tightened. My legs felt weak. I sank down beside it, tracing the letters with shaking fingers. "You were here," I whispered. "You were right here." A faint click echoed behind me, metal shifting. I froze. The sound came from the far corner, where a power conduit still blinked faintly red. Then my phone, dead for hours, buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with one word: unknown. I answered instinctively. "Dad?" It was Ethan's voice, not broken by static this time, but clear, trembling. "Ethan? Where are you?" "I don't know. It's dark. I keep hearing water. They said we'd be fine. They said it was safe." My vision blurred with tears. "Ethan, listen to me. I'm here. I found your site. I found everything. I know what they did." A pause. Then, softer. "I didn't want to leave you." The line crackled violently, a sound like electricity tearing through metal. I stumbled backward as sparks erupted from the wall near the tanks. One of the consoles flickered to life for the first time in years, its monitor flashing lines of code in bright green text. System log restored. Project file. Thermal core. Final transmission. The speakers filled the chamber with a faint recording. A man's voice, young, frightened. "Ethan's. This is Ethan Harland, lead field engineer. Solgan Minerals, Project 7. Containment breach in the lower reactor. 3 casualties confirmed. We're sealing the chamber, but the core's still unstable. If anyone finds this, tell my father." The recording cut off in a shriek of static. The tanks began to hiss, releasing a faint white vapor. I backed away, coughing. Whatever was inside had been sealed for a reason. I grabbed the papers and stuffed them into my bag. I didn't know how long the place would hold. As I climbed back toward the surface, the air grew warmer, buzzing faintly with residual energy. When I finally stepped outside, the storm had broken. The desert stretched silent beneath a blood-orange sky. The rain had washed away my footprints. I stood there, soaked and shaking, staring back at the tunnel entrance. Lightning flashed behind me, illuminating the basin, and for a moment, I thought I saw him, Ethan, standing by the ridge, the same way he used to after a long day in the field, his jacket fluttering in the wind. His face was calm. When the lightning faded, he was gone. I fell to my knees in the mud, clutching the helmet to my chest. I didn't know if what I'd seen was real, or just my mind finally breaking under the weight of everything. But when I opened my bag to check the papers, I noticed something I hadn't before: a small data drive taped to the back of one of the files. On it, etched with a knife, were 3 words in my son's handwriting: "They buried us." That night, I drove back to town with the drive in my pocket, my headlights cutting through the endless dark. I didn't know what I was about to uncover, but I knew one thing for certain: my son hadn't died in an accident. He'd been silenced, and someone was still making sure it stayed that way. By the time I reached Taos again, dawn was breaking across the desert. The horizon glowed pale orange, but the world felt colorless, drained. I drove straight to the one place I knew might still have ties to Solgan Minerals, the regional development office in Albuquerque. The building sat in a strip of glass and concrete on the outskirts of the city, polished and sterile, the kind of place built to erase its own history. The front desk clerk gave me the same polite smile people give to ghosts. "I need to speak with whoever oversees Solgan's legacy operations," I said. She typed something into her terminal, hesitated, and frowned. "Sir, that division was dissolved years ago. There's nothing under that name anymore." "There's always something," I said quietly. After a long pause, she made a call. A few minutes later, a man appeared in the hallway, tall, pressed suit, sharp features. Mason Coyle, regional director of Novatech Industries, Solgan's so-called successor company. He greeted me with professional charm that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Harland, I understand you have concerns about a discontinued project?" "Concerns?" I set my bag on the table. "Your company killed my son." His expression didn't change. "I think you've been misinformed. The Llano Estacado site was an environmental accident. Tragic, but nothing criminal." I pulled the helmet and the data drive from my bag, placing them on his desk. "That's Ethan's. I found them in your abandoned facility. You want to tell me why there's a thermal core reactor buried under the desert?" For the first time, his composure cracked a small, involuntary twitch near his mouth. He recovered quickly. "Those documents are classified property. You shouldn't have entered a restricted zone. You buried people down there." My voice rose. "You lied to the families. You falsified the reports." Coyle leaned forward. "You don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Harland. That project was experimental, highly confidential. Your son's team knew the risks." "The risks?" I snapped. "They were scientists, not soldiers." He sighed, as if tired of the conversation. "Listen, you're an old man carrying ghosts. I suggest you go home and forget about this. The past doesn't owe you answers." He stood to leave, but I caught his wrist. My voice was shaking. "If you think I'm going to bury this again, you don't know me." For a brief moment, our eyes locked, mine full of fury, his full of something colder: calculation. Then he smiled. "You'll find we have powerful friends, Mr. Harland. Be careful what holes you start digging. The desert swallows more than it gives back." He pulled free and walked away. I left the building trembling. Rage and helplessness burned in my chest like acid. Outside, the wind was dry and relentless. For a moment, I thought about giving up. What could one man do against a corporation that erased people as easily as deleting files? Then my phone buzzed. I froze. The screen lit up. "Unknown caller." I answered. The voice was faint, broken, distorted by interference, but it was him. "Dad, they sealed us in." My knees nearly buckled. "Ethan, where are you? Tell me where!" "I tried to stop them," he whispered. "They said it was safe. Tell Mom." I tried. The call ended abruptly, replaced by static so loud it hurt my ear. I sank against the car, shaking, unable to breathe. He was still reaching out through whatever boundary separated us, through the wires, the airwaves, maybe even through time itself. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by Ethan's papers, the helmet, and the data drive. I connected the drive to my laptop. It required a password, but Ethan had left clues all his life: coordinates, dates, fragments of phrases. When I typed his birthday followed by the project code, the drive unlocked. Inside were dozens of encrypted logs and video files. But one folder stood out. Final uplink. Core footage. I clicked it open. The video began with Ethan's face illuminated by red emergency light. His voice was ragged. Containment breach. We're trapped in the lower chamber. I repeat, trapped. If this message uploads, please. He looked straight into the camera. Tell my dad the truth. We didn't fail. They lied. The feed cut off. I stared at the screen for a long time before realizing what I had to do. I uploaded the files to every cloud server I could access. Then I sent them anonymously to a journalist I knew years ago from an environmental safety board. 2 days later, the story broke nationwide. Whistleblower evidence reveals corporate cover-up in 2005 New Mexico disaster. Federal agents raided Novatech's old facilities. Lawsuits erupted. And for the first time in 18 years, people spoke my son's name again. But victory didn't feel like relief. It felt hollow. Because the night the story aired, I got one more call. The same number. The same static. Only one line came through clearly, Ethan's voice. Soft. Almost peaceful. Thank you, Dad. Then the line went dead. I sat in the darkness for a long time. The desert wind rattling the windows. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, fading into silence. And I realized that sometimes justice doesn't bring closure. It only opens the wound wider, just enough to let the truth breathe. A week passed after the story broke. Reporters filled the airwaves, shouting headlines about corporate negligence, secret reactors, and a 20-year cover-up. Politicians called for investigations. Former employees came forward, confirming everything Ethan's files had revealed. But none of that brought peace. Justice on paper doesn't fill an empty chair at the dinner table. I spent those days drifting between numbness and exhaustion. My phone didn't ring. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. The kind of silence that feels alive, waiting. Then, one night, the waiting ended. It was just past 11 p.m. The wind outside had picked up, sweeping sand against the windows in long, soft waves. I was sitting in the dark, with a cup of cold coffee, when the landline, that old rotary phone, began to ring. My stomach turned to ice. The display flickered once, then steadied. Ethan Harland. I lifted the receiver slowly, afraid that if I spoke too soon, it would vanish. Ethan? My voice was barely a whisper. For a few seconds, nothing. Only the faint hiss of static, that strange desert hum. Then, softly, the voice I had loved and lost. Dad, it's me. Tears blurred my vision. Ethan, my boy. He sounded different. Calm. Steady. Almost peaceful. I heard what you did, he said. You told the truth. I had to, I said. You deserved that. There was a long pause. I could hear wind in the background. Faintly the same sound that had haunted every call. I tried to stop them, he said quietly. We knew it wasn't safe. The readings went red, but Mason wouldn't shut it down. Said the investors were watching. We didn't make it out. His breath caught, a tremor of pain even after all this time. But it wasn't all for nothing, Dad. You made them see. I pressed the receiver to my forehead, sobbing silently. I'm sorry I didn't believe in you, I whispered. You were right about everything. He laughed faintly, that soft, familiar laugh. You were always proud of me, even when you pretended you weren't. The static deepened, and the line started to crackle. Ethan? Dad? Listen. This isn't goodbye. I need you to go back to the ridge. The ridge? The place you used to visit, where the compass never stopped moving. I left something there. The connection cut out. I sat frozen, gripping the phone, hearing only the hollow tone of an empty line. Then, without thinking, I grabbed my keys. The drive to the ridge took less than 2 hours. The night sky was clear and endless, filled with stars that shimmered like fragments of old memory. When I reached the spot, the desert air was cold and still. I climbed the ridge with a flashlight in hand, the same path I'd walked every birthday, every anniversary. The earth felt different beneath my boots, softer, disturbed. At the top, my beam caught something metallic, glinting half buried in the sand. I knelt and brushed it off. It was a recorder, sealed in a weatherproof casing, its surface marked by years of wind and dust. Etched on the back were 3 words: for my father. My hands shook as I pressed play. Static. Wind. Then his voice. "This is Ethan Harland. If you're hearing this, it means you found the truth. We weren't testing energy cores, we were testing containment for something else. They used us to bury their mistakes. I'm leaving this recording where you'll find it, Dad, because I know you won't stop until you do. I love you. I always have." The message ended in silence. I sat there on the ridge for a long time, staring out over the vast, dark expanse of desert. The wind was gentle, brushing against my face like a hand. Somewhere out there, his voice had traveled across years of static and grief just to reach me one last time. As dawn broke, painting the horizon in gold, I set the recorder down beside the compass I'd always brought for him. The needle still trembled faintly, as if drawn toward a direction I couldn't see. I whispered, "You're free now, son." And for the first time in 18 years, I didn't feel the need to wait for the phone to ring again. It's been 1 year since the last call. The desert doesn't change much with time, just the color of the sky, the way the light hits the stones. Some mornings, when the sun rises over the Sangre de Cristo mountains, the whole valley glows gold, and I almost expect to see Ethan standing there, notebook in hand, grinning like he used to. But I know better now. He's not in the wind, or the static, or the empty spaces between phone rings. He's in everything that lives on, because he once dreamed of it. After the investigation ended, Novatech collapsed under its own lies. Executives were indicted, old files resurfaced. Families of the other victims finally got the truth they'd been denied for nearly 2 decades. The world moved on, as it always does, but something inside me shifted too. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I was guided by what I'd learned. I sold the old house in Taos and moved south to Las Cruces, where I started volunteering at a community science center for kids. Most of them come from small desert towns, kids who stare at the stars the way Ethan once did, with curiosity too big for the world around them. Some afternoons, I tell them stories about the land, how it holds secrets, how it remembers everything that happens beneath its surface. I never mention the company, or the cover-up, or the calls that cross the border between life and death. But I tell them the truth in my own way. That's the thing about discovery, I say. It's not about what you find, it's about what you refuse to let stay buried. The first time I said that aloud, I realized it wasn't just for them. It was for me. I still visit the ridge once a month. I drive out early, before the heat settles in, and climb to the top where the compass and recorder lie side by side. The casing has cracked from years of sun, but when I press play, the device still works. Ethan's voice comes through clear, unwavering. "Dad, I love you. I always have. I never get used to it, but it no longer breaks me. It reminds me." A few weeks ago, a reporter from Santa Fe came to interview me for a follow-up story. She wanted to know what it felt like to bring justice after all that time. I told her the truth. Justice isn't something you win. It's something you carry, like grief or love. She looked puzzled, but she wrote it down anyway. After she left, I sat on my porch, listening to the desert wind. It had that same faint hum I used to hear in the phone static, the sound that once made me think Ethan was trying to talk to me. Now I think maybe he still is, just differently. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the window, older, quieter, but lighter somehow. The man who used to live in silence, waiting for a phone to ring, is gone. The one who remains has learned that not every voice is meant to be heard forever. Some are meant to echo just long enough to guide you home. The desert has a way of teaching patience. The wind moves slowly. The stars don't rush to rise. You learn to listen without demanding answers. And if you listen long enough, you start to understand what Ethan meant when he said, "They didn't tell you the truth." The truth was never about the company or the cover-up. It was about life fragile, fleeting, but powerful enough to reach across years of silence just to say I love you. Before I leave the ridge each time, I place my hand on the sand and close my eyes. I can still feel the faint vibration of the earth, the same pulse I felt the night he first called me. The desert hums softly, like breathing, and I whisper back, "I hear you, son. I always will." Then I walk down the ridge, toward the waiting sunlight, grateful, at last, not for the call that came too late, but for the one that still echoes quietly inside me. Because in the end, that's what grief becomes when we let it live. Not a wound, but a message carried on the wind. Truth can be buried, but it never dies. Love doesn't fade with silence, it finds a way to be heard. And sometimes, the hardest goodbyes are not the ones we say out loud, but the ones we learn to live with until peace finally answers back.